Thank you, Ryan. First of all, thank you, Aaron, for putting this together here around the squares there, sitting back there. For allowing us the opportunity to talk about this, and thank all of you for attending tonight. I'd like to start by saying I think it's a little unfortunate that the advertising for this, at least recently, seemed to be suggesting that this was a one-sided forum only attended by advocates. I do think that everyone was invited from our delegation, both persuasive Republican and Democrat, and it's an open meeting for any citizens in this area to attend. So I do think it's a little unfortunate that this was advertised as only a pro-tax caps in the Constitution meeting. But that being said, I will say that I'm one of those people who believes that we should be doing that. And so tonight, hopefully, through the panelists who are talking to you from their various perspectives, and perhaps from the questions that are provided to us, we can lay out a little bit of the reason why we're here today with this discussion. And I think it really bears reminding ourselves of the decades of efforts to control property taxes that have gone forth prior to the final 2008 Reform Act, of which these tax caps and the Constitution discussion are all about. They're sort of the final linchpin, I think, of the reform efforts that we've enacted. But the history, if you want to just go back 36 years to Doc Bowen, Otis Bowen, our great governor, who in 1973 really enacted precedent-setting property tax reform by raising income taxes and sales taxes statewide and taking all that money and cutting property taxes across the board in this state. He did that with this proposal, but more importantly, the real key to that plan was to control property taxes in the future once they did this big cut. Well, 35 years later, in 2008, you couldn't recognize the controls that had been enacted in 1973 because there have been so many exceptions created through the years. Well-intended, often asked for by local government and the legislature granting those exceptions to allow for this increase or that increase for that fund or this fund that really needed attention, and oftentimes for very important projects. I need my jail expanded. We don't have the revenue to do it. We need an exception to these limits on the property taxes, for example. You do that enough times, as it was done, and you see that the exceptions really overwhelmed the original plan in 1973, so that you really didn't have property tax controls anymore at all, and you were seeing dramatic increases in property taxes across the board. Point two here, remember also that the Supreme Court in Indiana in 1998 ruled that the way we assess property in this state was unconstitutional. We had to redo all assessment in this state for all property. Importantly, they said we favored residential too much. We had to take away some of the taxing that was being done on business and commercial in particular, and shift it back to residential, because the Indiana Constitution says that all property shall be taxed in a uniform and equal manner. And that's a very important part of this discussion tonight. Keep that in your mind as we go forward. And so we had, through that process of changing the way we tax, a lot of the dramatic increases we saw just in recent years in property taxes occurred. And it came from that Supreme Court ruling, not all by that, partly because of all the exceptions to the Bowen plan. But those are two important moments to keep in your mind, understanding how we got here tonight. Very important. I will say this, and I want to hand this off then to Representative Esbick, but I don't want to talk too long, but I do hope you'll ask questions about this, because it really is important to understand why people like myself and others feel so strongly, having looked at the history of property tax efforts and control efforts, and seeing all the failures that occurred, why we feel that it's important that we do something by putting these tax caps in the Constitution to ensure that these exceptions that have been always created by the legislature, that these lack of controls that, or the failure of the controls in the past don't occur again. Or this property tax reform effort that we've enacted in 2008 will surely be doomed in the future as well. So I feel strongly that we should be doing this. I think it's defensible, and I think it's logical. I know that there are opponents across the state, particularly local government and schools, who are concerned that by controlling property taxes, you will squeeze their ability to provide services. I would argue that there are opportunities in place and options for local government that have not been taken advantage of, that were created by this new plan, because they really think we may not really go through with these tax caps in the Constitution, and that this whole plan may kind of unravel in the end. Because here's the last point I'm going to make. If we don't put the tax caps in the Constitution, that uniform and equal clause still applies. It's still in the Indiana Constitution. And by its very nature, you can argue, I think possibly effectively, that tax caps violate the uniform and equal clause of the Indiana Constitution. Right there, I will tell you, if we don't do this this year, if we don't allow this issue to go to the people of Indiana, which is what will happen if we pass this bill this year, tax caps and Constitution, we will then have basically followed the procedures for amending the Indiana Constitution within the legislature, which then turns the issue over to the people of Indiana. If we don't do that, I assure you there will be a lawsuit filed immediately by those who want to undo these tax caps. And it will happen, and they have a chance of winning. Very important to remember that as we go forward. There's a reason why we're doing this. It's constitutionally solid in this approach. It makes sense. And for the enemies of property tax reform, particularly tax caps, the one thing they hope most of all is that we do not place these caps in the Constitution. So remember that as we go forward. Jeff?